Hi there, I'm Karen McCarthy, and it's time to Karen-ize. Today's Wednesday when we talk about spiritual health, and we're going to kind of take last week's topic just a step further. Last week was talking about stress, and today I want to talk about balancing busyness with stillness or rest. Sometimes we have trouble with that stillness/rest. I know I used to. I think I mentioned in the last video, I had been raised with the thought that until everything was done, all the work was done, I couldn't rest. That doesn't mean I didn't get to rest sometimes, but I think I took it a little bit to heart, more than my mom intended it to. And for a good portion of my adult life, in fact, actually probably until I retired and started retraining myself, I actually felt guilty if I was resting, if there was anything that could possibly be done. Now, when I lived by myself, it was pretty easy to keep the house clean and everything tidy and, the laundry up and all of that. So I had a little bit easier time then. But when I took in foster kids, there was always something that could be done, always. So I had trouble with that rest concept. And a friend of mine introduced me to Psalm 46:10 a long time ago. And she said that that was a verse that God had given her. And it's be still and know that I am God. And God over the years really impressed on me, be still, to the extent that it had several times become my license plate on my car, just to remind me. And when I retired, I went back to that license plate. Be still, because that is such a hard thing for my brain to get around, or it was. I don't have to feel guilty when I'm being still. But I think I equated being still with being lazy, being idle. And the Bible has a lot to say about those things. So just in case you struggle with that too, let's talk about it. So be still and know that I am God. That's the theme. In Mark 6:31, Jesus says, well, because so many people were coming and they didn't even get a chance to eat, he said to his disciples, come with me by ourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Now, do you think Jesus' work was ever done? There were always people that wanted to hear from him, to be touched by him, to be healed by him. And he said, let's get away. We need to get some rest. We need to eat and we need to rest. In Exodus 23:12, one of the kind of reaffirming of the commandments of God to the Israelites, it said, 6 days you do your work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that you and your ox and your donkey may rest. And then it talks about slaves and foreigners living among you may be refreshed. So the purpose of rest is that we will be refreshed. I love that. And then if we contrast that with idleness, in 1 Timothy 5:13, it says, and I can't even remember who they're talking about, but it says, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. So if we find ourselves becoming a busybody and saying things, gossiping basically, we might want to look at that kind of rest. That's not what the Bible is talking about. In Proverbs 31:7, talking about we call it the Proverbs 31 woman. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. And Proverbs 19:15, laziness brings on deep sleep and the shiftless go hungry. Now, when we first look at that, deep sleep sounds like a really good thing, but what they're talking about is basically someone who doesn't want to get out of bed. Someone who is so lazy they don't want to do anything. They just sit around, couch potatoes, basically we call them nowadays, and they go hungry because they can't even hold down a job because they don't have a good work ethic. So laziness, there's a difference between taking rest and being lazy. And I used to combine those two, thinking that when I rested, if I sat around and read a book, if I did some crafts, if I watched TV, I was actually being lazy. And it's more like if we are doing those things instead of doing what we need to do to be productive or to live a good life or to be healthy, if we're doing that instead and we're choosing to do that above all else, then it becomes a problem. But God said we need rest. In Genesis, he modeled that. Do you think God really needed to rest after creating? I don't think so. But he modeled that because he knew how important it was for us to take time to rest. So if you struggle with feeling guilty for resting, just know that there's a purpose for that. If you struggle with resting above all else and not doing the things you need to have a productive life, take a look at that too, because you have to have a good mix or a balance, a healthy balance of busyness and rest. And that varies depending on the season of our life. If you're struggling with health problems, you may need to rest more than be busy, but that's an extenuating circumstance. So just know that you need that balance. Sometimes might be more busyness, but put that rest in there. Sometimes you might need more rest and less busyness. Even as a retired person, I stay busy. But if I take rest above all else and my dishes pile up, the dog hair piles up, that's what piles up in our house. If the laundry piles up and I'm resting in spite of the need to do those things, then I've got a problem. But when I first retired and I was super, super sick, then rest took precedent. So there is that healthy balance, and that varies from person to person and season to season in our lives. So I hope that helps, and be sure, take time to rest and get your stuff done too. So have a great one, and we'll talk to you next time.